my goodness. Hello and welcome to Paranormal Pets. So for this particular episode, I am going to do a little bit of paranormal pets through literature. I've been very fortunate to have completed a couple of my stacked up ghost books this past couple of months and thought I would share some of the stories that I found concerning animals. So you get to sit back and relax and get ready to hear some spooky tales by various authors. So we're going to get started right after this. And welcome back. I am going to tell you that I have a whole bunch of pugs who are being very naughty. Hopefully my story time will settle them down. The first book that we're going to read from is Spooky Florida, Tales of Hauntings, Strange Happenings, and Other Local Lore. This is retold by S.E. Schlosser, and this comes from Guilford, Connecticut. Interestingly enough, Connecticut for Florida, but whatever. I am very sad to say that my book has sustained some damage because apparently it is not puppy proof. But there are some interesting stories in here that do include, they are kind of folklorized, if you will, stories of haunted locations. One does include Flight 401. One includes the Skyway Bridge, which is a very famous one here. But the interesting thing is that they're kind of told from first-person point of view. The story that we are going to read comes from part 2 of this book that is called Powers of Darkness and Light. It is chapter 18. It's called Little Lucy, and it comes from Putnam County. Oh my, these pugs are something tonight. Okay. All right, little ones, let's settle in so that I can read you a nice little bedtime story. So Little Lucy is kind of a cute story. It's very folkloric, to be certain. This part seems to be a little bit more of word of mouth stories that are copied down and written. So we'll see what you think of this one. Here we go. A tall, proud figure was the medicine man. They said he was descended from an African princess who married a Native American warrior priest, and he looked the part. There was a regal air about him with his dark hair and flashing eyes that could pierce like the gaze of an eagle. His thin face seemed cold and proud until he smiled. People who earned a smile from the medicine man would follow him to the ends of the earth ever afterward, or so they said. It was that kind of smile. The medicine man wore the ordinary trousers, shirt, and coat that any man living in Florida settlement might have, but added to these were 2 items that were not typical. One was a sheathed knife he wore strapped around his calf. It held a green jewel in the hilt, and when the medicine man was working, the jewel was said to glow with an unearthly light. The second item hung from a thong around his neck. It was a small pouch that was said to contain the dust of the warrior priest from whom he was descended. This dust was so powerful that he needed only a pinch of it to work wonders, or so they said in the local settlement. Normally, the young couple working at a farm on the outer reaches of the remote settlement would never have dreamed of approaching such an awesome figure as the medicine man. But terrible fear moved them as nothing else would. For their only daughter, the light of their eyes lay dying on her bed, wasting away day after day, and no one knew why. She was a scamp of a little girl with golden blonde curls and big green eyes who had never been sick a day in her life. She raced around the farm with her little dog Lucy, climbing trees, building forts, petting the farm animals, making friends with the wild birds, and singing her little heart out, mostly songs she made up about her dog, Lucy Lou. My friend Lou, Lucy Lou's a darling. She caroled over and over until both her parents were singing it too. And little Lucy was a darling. She weighed all of 10 pounds, just a wee mite of a dog with black curls all over her minute body. But she made up for her tiny size with her fierce spirit and protective ways. She wasn't afraid of anything and would do whatever it took to protect her family, especially her beloved mistress. Little Lucy would bark at gators if they got too close to the house, scold the work horses when they got too lazy, growl when she saw snakes, and chase away much larger dogs if they set foot on her property. And no one who seemed threatening got anywhere near her golden-haired little mistress. She was the perfect watchdog. But even Lucy couldn't save her friend from the mysterious malady that overtook her. One day, the little girl came into the house complaining that she was tired. She lay down on her little bed and couldn't get up again. Her poor little body became rigid as if she was made of wood, and her arms curled inward until they lay shriveled and useless across her tiny chest, which barely moved, so tiny were her breaths. Little Lucy lay upon the bed beside her young mistress, keeping watch and occasionally licking her cheek, but she could do nothing to help her little friend. The parents were terrified when they saw this transformation of their previously healthy little daughter. The father went all the way to the next settlement to fetch the doctor, but old Doc could find nothing wrong with her. He stayed at their farm for several days, doing everything he could to cure her using traditional medicine, but the little girl just faded more and more into her own head, her skin growing paler and translucent, her body more rigid, her eyes vacant. Finally, the doctor told the grieving parents to prepare themselves for the worst. He left them several bottles of medicine, and the husband drove him back to the settlement, for the doctor had other patients to tend, whom he had neglected for too long. The mother sat beside her daughter's bed, stroking her shriveled arm as she waited for her husband to return home with the wagon. There must be something they could do, she thought desperately. They couldn't just let their little girl die without a fight. The tired mother cudgeled her brain, trying to find some hope for her daughter. By the time she heard the jingle of the harness and the thud of hooves in the farmyard signaling the arrival of her husband, she had remembered the story she'd heard about the medicine man. Excited, she hurried out to the farmyard to speak to her husband. Little Lucy caught her excitement and followed her outside for the first time in days, barking with something of her old spirit. It will be hard to find him, the young father said. He roams all over the settlements in turn, and I'm not sure which tribe he lives with when he's not roaming. But the young father was determined to try. It gave him something to do, and action was better than sitting at home watching for his daughter to die. So he saddled up a fresh horse and rode to all of the nearby settlements to leave messages for the medicine man. It took him 3 days to return, and his daughter had faded away to practically nothing in his absence. Her mother couldn't get any food down her throat, and only a few sips of water. It looked like the end. And then little Lucy lifted her head from her mistress's pillow and whined, looking towards the window. Suddenly, she sprang up and raced out of the room, barking a welcome. She danced in front of the door until the father let her out, and then she raced into the yard to dance around a tall, mysterious figure of the medicine man. The medicine man smiled at the little dog, a smile that made you want to follow him to the ends of the earth, and he picked her up and scratched her faithful little head as he stepped into the house. Tremulously, the young parents took the medicine man to see their daughter. He placed little Lucy on the bed beside her young mistress and then spent several minutes examining the little girl from every angle. Finally, he took the parents to the kitchen and instructed them to go outside and pick wildflowers, keeping positive thoughts of healing in their minds while they worked. The parents agreed and looked at each other in hope for the first time since their daughter had fallen ill. As they left the property in search of wildflowers, the medicine man began his rituals. He opened the windows and then the doors to let the fresh air in. Then he went outside the house, pulling sacred objects out of his conjure bag and ritually marking the front door before he began the sacred ritual for summoning healing forces that were known only to a few of his people. As he worked, the clouds overhead began to boil and swirl. Then a fierce wind swept through the farmyard, trying to flame everything in its path. But the medicine man continued chanting until the wind died away and a single ray of light beamed down through the shadows. The ray of light was followed by others as the clouds parted and blue sky showed through. When the farmyard was ablaze with sunlight, the medicine man released the first part of his healing ritual. The second part would begin when the child's parents returned. A few minutes passed in peace and calm. A gentle, warm breeze filled the clearing, and the air outside the farmhouse buzzed with light and hope for the first time in weeks. When the parents returned with their offering of wildflowers, the medicine man had them stand outside of the open window and sing a sacred song while he continued the healing rituals inside the house. Taking an armful of flowers from the mother, he walked inside the house. Instantly, the small house began to shake as if it were caught up in a massive earthquake. As he strewed handfuls of flowers on the kitchen table and floor, the shaking grew worse. Pots and pans rattled and cutlery jumped in its drawer as he stepped into the child's bedroom. As he strewed the flowers around her bed, the shaking grew so bad that the small mirror on the wall shattered, and little Lucy sat up in alarm, her dark eyes watching him keenly. The little dog trembled from head to toe, frightened by the shaking, but she refused to leave her mistress's side. The medicine man gave her a pat on the head as he strewed the last of the flowers around the child on the bed. Then he began the ritual chant of healing, calling for the flowers to rescue this child from the darkness that threatened her life. Suddenly, the little girl stiffened and sat bolt upright, her eyes staring blankly into nothing. Her mouth opened and a black mist boiled out, filling the room with a foul stench. 2 red lights appeared on the back of the child's throat, and the evil head of a black serpent appeared, tapping its way forward along her tongue. Slowly, the medicine man tempted the serpent forth, offering it mushroom caps bespelled to make them irresistible to a spirit creature, such as the one that dwelled in the child. The serpent slid slowly out of the child's mouth as she made miserable retching sounds in her throat. It was nearly as long as the child's body, and the medicine man was amazed the child was still alive, with such a dark being in possession of her. She must be very strong and honorable, indeed, to fight so long against such a spirit. Suddenly, the serpent was loose on the bed. This was the moment of danger. The medicine man reached for his special knife with the jewel in the hilt, but his fingers had not quite reached it before the serpent sprang forward and coiled its body around him, squeezing tight. The medicine man cried out, the knife dropping to the floor. The evil spirit squeezed tighter, cutting off his breath. Then the evil serpent thrust its head into his mouth, intent on possessing him as it had possessed the child. On the bed, little Lucy started yapping fiercely, dancing around the covers and over the little girl's legs as she nipped again and again at the snake's black body. The medicine man made frantic sounds in his throat and thrust out his chest so that the medicine bag, full of dust that the warrior priest swung out from under his shirt. Little Lucy made a great leap and tore the bag off its thong. The mouth of the bag gapped open and dust spilled out over the bed, over the little girl, over the choking medicine man, and over the evil serpent spirit. The skin of the evil spirit began to sizzle. It withdrew its red-eyed head from the medicine man and screamed an inhuman wail that cut through the soul like razor blades. Wherever the dust landed, the serpent's skin boiled and turned into a black mist. Within seconds, the serpent shape had vanished, and a small dark cloud roiled above the bed. With a gasp of a command, the medicine man scooped up the last of the dust and threw it into the cloud, which vanished with a bang. The young parents came bustling fearfully into the house, having heard the serpent's terrible scream. A wave of fresh air, perfumed by flowers and filled with the hope conjured by the first part of the ritual, filled the child's bedroom. The medicine man was already getting to his feet, and on the bed, little Lucy was ecstatically licking the face of her young mistress. The child's eyes were closed, but her parents could hear her singing very softly, "Lucy Lou, my friend Lou, Lucy Lou's a darling." Then she opened her green eyes and looked up at her weeping parents. Her mother gathered up the child and hugged her tightly, and the father, forgetting himself in his joy, pounded the medicine man on the back, just as he would have done to one of his buddies at the tavern. The medicine man gave him one of his rare smiles, but the father backed away hastily, remembering that the man was descended from an African princess and a warrior priest. But such was the power of the medicine man's smile that the father relaxed and smiled back before hurrying forward to pull mother and child into his arms. The medicine man silently withdrew from the house, pausing only to collect the sacred items he'd used in the healing ritual. When he reached the yard, he heard a short bark behind him. Turning, he saw little Lucy running down the steps towards him. She carried his leather pouch in her mouth. Smiling, he knelt down and rubbed the little dog behind the ears before taking the pouch from her. There was still a little dust in the very bottom of the pouch, so he pulled the straps tightly and reached up to secure it to the thong around his neck. Then he paused as a thought struck him. He looked into the eyes of the faithful little dog who would continue to guard her susceptible little mistress when he was gone. She might need some help keeping evil spirits away from her mistress in the future, and he might not always be around to help. So he lowered his arms and beckoned to the dog. She jumped at once into his lap, and he laughed as he fended off her joyful licks. Then he tied the bag around the collar of little Lucy as she wagged her stubby tail and wriggled in delight. When he was finished, she licked his cheek, giving him a meaty woof of thanks into his ear. "Lucy Lou, my friend Lou, Lucy Lou's a darling," the medicine man said softly, stroking her tiny head as she joyfully rolled her eyes. Then he shooed the dog back into the house to tend to her mistress and left the sunny farmyard to the laughing, shouting, weeping voices of its rejoicing family and to the excited yapping of a very special little dog. So there you go. That is our first story, and we will change books and do a couple more stories right after these messages. So stay tuned.